Right, got a very, very good question during the break. And the question was, could we input a set of values into the computer? And functionalism's answer is, well, yeah, sure, just like we input values into people. Right? People get values input into them as they grow up, or they acquire sets of values through interactions with other people. There's things like religious conversions, or sometimes people are doing something and that at a certain point they say, hey, wait a moment, no, this is wrong. So I had a, go, just go. So I had this example, I can't remember what the situation was, but there was a guy who was doing this thing, whatever it was, on a regular basis, for some company or organization or the government or whatever it was. He was doing this, and then one day he goes, well, wait a moment, this thing I'm doing is wrong. I shouldn't be doing this, and he stopped doing it. So he got out of the situation. And there are, various people who are criminals or racists. There's a fellow, I remember reading an article a number of years ago against a guy about a guy who was a terrible racist and who was doing all this stuff like they're doing now in voter suppression, keeping the black people down. And one day he went, wait a moment, I'm on the wrong side. I'm a black guy. And he changed and now works for civil rights. And he reported that, when he was doing it, him and all the people around him thought they were doing the best thing. They were the right guys. They were good guys. And they were fighting for truth and justice and not tolerance, but truth and justice, the American way. So whatever it is that human brains do for humans to have values can be done with a computer. And we might give them good values, or we might give them evil values. Right? So, and the answer, the answer is always, can human brains do it? Right? Well, if human brains can do it, if human brains do it, then the fact that human brains do it by neuron, there's one thing about which there's absolutely no mystery. Whatever precisely brains do to make morals or emotions or love or kindness, compassion, hatred, greed, all the human qualities, whatever humans do to make these things, those things are done with neurons in a chemical bath of blood and hormones. That's it, and we can model that. Now, all right, so that's the main argument. Now, that's now someone might come to me and say, well, Dr. Young, how would we program a computer? What program would we like? Would we write to make a mechanical brain have feelings, or a mechanical brain have values? Values are different from feelings. Right? And I'm going to say, well, whatever program there is in the brain. And they're going to say, well, no, that's not good enough. You have to say what the program is, what it does precisely. And my answer is going to be, okay, fine. First, tell me how human brains do it.
So then the question really would be, how does the mind work?
Yeah, the question is, how does the mind work?
So if you can crack the code to that, then you can teach the computer.
Yeah, and we've cracked little bits of it. Practically, well, every year, at least every year, maybe every month, There's some advance in neuroscience, and we understand how the brain works a little bit better. But remember, it's the most complicated thing in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing more complicated than a human brain. So we're getting little bits here, little bits there, a little bit here, a little bit there. But we know immaterial minds, immaterial substance can't do it. We know that the brain is made of neurons and glands, right? And they do things. And brain is made, mind is made by the brain doing things. It's not magic, right? There's no such thing as magic. Oh yeah? No, conjuring maybe. I know there's no, I'm very disappointed there's no such thing as actual magic, because I know I'd be really good at it. I think it's probably the thing I would be best at. I would be really good at it.
It's the Mad Wizard.
If you wanted to want to know how precisely how a mechanical brain would do something, then you must tell me exactly how a human brain does that thing. Now, I can tell you how a mechanical brain would develop internal machinery to create an internal visual field, to create an internal model of what the other world looks like, outside world looks like to visually, because we know how the brain does that substantially. One part of this would be neural Darwinism. We would set up models of neurons and give them inputs through visual sensors, maybe tuned to exactly only the frequencies that human eyes can see. But maybe we have the computer have visual sensors that see into the deep infrared and the high ultraviolet as well, right? We could give it better eyes than we give to humans. And then we give it lots of inputs, and we have the neural nets feed back to each other, and they do it just the way the human brain does. The human brain will learn the infant brain. When a baby is born, the infant brain learns how to see by its brain reacting to stimuli. And after a while, the brain organizes itself, and you have a visual field. This is how we all learn to think. We were not born able to distinguish visually distinguish objects from each other. That's something the brain learned afterwards. So, right? So that's something where we probably could eventually be able to fairly easily make a machine that does that, because we just have, the machine programs itself. We don't have to program the individual neurons. We set up a system where they program themselves. Otherwise, it's just not feasible. prove the mechanical brain cannot do X, cannot do something, first you have to explain how the human brain does that. And it's like, the brain makes X by doing Y. So Y is this identifiable process that we can see, we can understand, we can see it operating in the human brain, we know how the brain does that. And then you have to prove that computers can't do that. Right, the computers can't emulate that. The computers cannot handle the information side of that. Now, I guess one thing I want you guys to have in the back of your minds, right, is that I could be wrong, or I could be doing something not quite kosher, or I could be thinking badly. So you can ask yourself, am I setting the bar too high for this kind of proof? I don't think I am. I think that if you want to prove that I can't do something, you have to prove how it's done, and because we're not talking about present computers, we're talking about future computers. Right? If you're going to prove that I can't ever do something, there's something I can't ever do, which is actually fairly easy to do because there's lots of stuff I'll never be able to do, you have to prove that this requires something that I demonstrably cannot do. For instance, I can't be a theoretical physicist, because to be a theoretical physicist you have to be able to do calculus, and I can't do calculus. Calculus makes my brain hurt. Right? I mean, I can very, very slowly work through one or two calculus problems, but it takes me a long time, and then you have the textbook right there. It doesn't stick. If you give me a stack of calculus things to do and tell me I have to do them in 10 minutes, I wouldn't be able to do them in 10 minutes, 10 hours maybe. To give a very crude example, right? We have a gorge, a road either side, and we have this thing called, this function we called bridging. Right? Bridging is putting a hard surface, is putting a surface across there that a car can drive on. Look, a convertible. Vroom, it's going too fast. And there's no driver, so it's going to crash. But so, now to prove that bridging can't be done, I don't know how bridges work. That strikes me as, right, it's just mad. Okay, to prove that something can't be done, well look, suppose I want to prove that you can't bridge a gap with whipped cream. Right? My argument, we have something like this. The bridging requires creating a surface that is strong and durable. So there's a surface that will bear the weight of a car if there's nothing supporting it except bracing under here. Whipped cream has no tensile strength. And the same applies, so it can't support it. If I try to make a bridge out of whipped cream, I will fail every time. Same for cream cheese. Even cheddar, even like making this out of cheddar wouldn't work. Cheddar does not have the tensile strength, does not have the compression strength or anything like that. Making a bread, in fact, cheddar does not have the strength to hold up its own weight. If I make a bridge out of cheese, it will collapse all on its own, probably before, and then I'll be buried in rats or something. It won't be pretty. So I can prove you can't make a bridge out of cream cheese. Now, it's difficult to prove that something can't be done. I would have said you can't make a gun out of the kind of plastic used in 3D printers. And then these guys went and made a gun that could be, designed a gun that could be made in a 3D printer. And then they demonstrated it, and it lasted for quite a number of rounds. So, so these fellows demonstrated you can make a gun that won't show up on metal detectors. Yay! So, and I mean, the idea that something is impossible is a kind of idea that needs a lot of proof. Many people over the history, people have made many claims that something is impossible that have turned out to be false. Impossible to go faster than 60 miles an hour. Impossible to know the composition of the sun. Right? A couple of hundred years ago, a guy said, this is an example of something we will never know. We will never know the composition of the sun. Dude, 200 years later, we know the composition of the sun. Right? So to say that something is impossible has a high burden of proof. Traditionally, claims that things are impossible are usually refuted. So if you tell me that something is impossible, you have to come up with a freaking good argument. So now I'm going to talk about 3 arguments against functionalism, or more if I've got time. Now, I actually like the first one, the Chinese room argument, because it allows me to talk about semantics, what semantics is, what meaning is, in a very functional way. And that's one of the reasons I really admire John Locke, David Hume, Bishop Berkeley, because they looked at how things actually worked. That was the really important thing about the British empiricists. They didn't spin air castles, they looked at how stuff actually worked. Okay. All right. The way the Chinese room argument goes is Searle says Searle says computers can only do syntax. I suppose to say computers will only ever be able to do syntax. They can't do semantics. Syntax is manipulation of symbols, organizing and reorganizing symbols, and semantics is about meaning. And it just occurs to me that this is a bad distinction for him, because syntax conveys meaning as well as semantics. So we'll just say computers can only manipulate symbols, they can't understand what those symbols mean. I'm going to rewrite that in a way that's better for, or I'll add it. can't ever know what those symbols mean. Now, this is not what functionalism says. This is something Searle says about functionalism. Functionalism does not say that brains manipulate symbols, and it does not say you can make a mind merely by manipulating symbols. Functionalism says we can emulate neurons, and if you get enough emulated neurons together, we'll have something that does what a brain does, and if it does what a brain does, it will make a mind the same way a brain makes a mind. We're not talking. Functionalists don't talk about symbol manipulation, except as a task that minds do. So here's the Chinese room example, and this is meant to illustrate this example. It's meant to illustrate this argument. Now, I'm going to underline one claim. It's kind of repeated. Computers can only do syntax. Computers can only ever manipulate symbols. Right? They're basically the same claim in different words. There's Searle's claim. People who are not Searle don't necessarily agree with this. This is something Searle believes, but I think it's something Searle needs to prove. But I don't see him proving it. But I can illustrate Searle's argument, and I think illustrate its weakness by giving his Chinese room example. A Chinese room is like this. In the room, there's a room where there's a fellow. And with the fellow is books. Lots and lots and lots of books. Have you ever seen one of those make-your-own-adventure books?
Yeah.
Where you open the book and it says, you see this, what do you do? Do you go into the cave? Do you go to the waterfall? Do you sit down and have lunch? Whatever it is. And then you say, if you go into the cave, turn to page 32. Go to page 32, a dragon eats you. Okay, or, you know, there's two forks, you know, the cave goes in, it's dark, what do? Do you light your lantern, go on in the dark? You light your lantern, you see there's a pit in front of you. And presumably, you know, you go on in the dark, you die! Right. So, there's these things where you look something up and it tells you what to do next. And what these books are the first page of every book is, there's like Chinese characters, right? There's just a whole bunch of Chinese characters. Right? The first book has a Chinese character, and it says things like, if the first character is this, go to this page, maybe this page in this book. And the second character is this, go into this page and then this book. All right? So for any Chinese character, if it's the first character on a scroll, you can do something. And what happens is that there's this little slot. This little slot, and someone outside passes in these little scrolls. And these scrolls have Chinese characters on them. And what the fellow inside does, is the person outside. The person inside does is he looks and he sees the first character, and he looks through his books until he finds that character, and that says, if this is the first character, go to page so-and-so. Right? And you go to page so-and-so, and it says, well, look, what's the second character? And he looks and finds the second character, and that page says, well, if this is that character, if this is the second character, go to the, if this is the second character, and it's the last character, go to this page. If it's the second character and there's more characters, go to this page. Or if, you know, if this is the second character and this is the third character, do this one. So it's like, you get a list of set of Chinese characters or any kind of ideogram, and the books tell you what to do. And it said, right, and you get a book, and you eventually, after a while, you get to say, well, okay, if this was this, if the third character is this, you write this, and it gives you some characters to write. And if there's no more characters, write this. If there is more characters, do this. So every eventuality is covered. That's why there's a lot of books. There's thousands of books, because this is like really complicated. Thousands and thousands and thousands of books, lots of rules. This guy has a lot of time on his hands, and he's really quick at looking stuff up. And eventually, he writes a string, somehow manages to write a string of Chinese characters on another slip of paper. And and he passes the scroll out. Now, the fellow on the outside can read Chinese, and what he's doing is he's writing questions in Chinese on slips of paper and passing them inside. This fellow cannot read Chinese. He does not know what any of the symbols mean, but he manipulates them by formal rules based on these books and writes stuff down, and it comes up at the next question. So it's like, what is the airspeed velocity of an unladen African swallow? And you comes back with, I don't know, 85 miles an hour, 85 knots, something like that. Every question he could ask is contained, all the information is contained there, but he doesn't understand it. And Searle says, look, this is not producing any semantics. It's just simple, the meaning, he doesn't know the meanings of the symbols. Maybe they're encoded in the books, the meanings of the symbols, but this is just formal rules. There is no semantics here. There's no understanding of the rules. Now, I've got a couple of things to say about this. The first is, you remember those rules I wrote at the beginning of the lecture? The second rule was, you do not prove that something cannot be done by devising a plan that can't do it. This is a plan that cannot produce semantics. Does it prove that computers can never produce semantics? Right? If this was an input-output device instead of a guy and a set of formal rules for manipulating symbols, yes, that would not produce consciousness. I kind of agree with that. But that's not what functionalism says. That's not what strong artificial intelligence says. What strong artificial intelligence says is we have a machine that does what neurons do. Now, second point, did Searle tell us how human beings do semantics?
Did who say?
Did Searle, the guy who came up with the Chinese room. Did he come up? No, he did not. He did not tell us how we do semantics. He just said, computers can only do this, computers cannot do semantics. So, what kind of things can do semantics? How is semantics done? What is it what is the difference between an object that does semantics, that understands stuff, and one that doesn't? Well, it's not a matter. It's not primarily a matter of language. My girlfriend has this dog, who we're both very fond of, and the dog tore an anterior cruciate ligament last year. It's a By the way, if you have a dog, if you have a medium or large dog, I urge you to keep its weight down, because overweight dogs will blow out their ACLs. That's what happened to our dog. So now that we put the dog on a diet, so it's always starving. All right, so this dog, I made this set of steps so it can get on the bed, because we're worried about it putting extra strain on its ACL. And so I trained it to go up and down the stairs. And if you say up the stairs to the dog, it will go up the stairs. Put in a hand gesture too, it helps. Say to the dog, sit, it sits, down, it lows down, lies down. High five, it'll wave its paw a bit like that. It's not going to really give you a high five. It doesn't go, yeah. But,
Or shake.
right. So, the dog does semantics, because the dog recognizes the meaning of a word.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's what meaning is, fundamentally. If you know what to do, how to react to a symbol, you know what that symbol means. I'll give another example. Here's a symbol that not very well drawn. Okay, you're driving along a road, you see you can't see very well. The light's against you, this thing is backlit so you can't see what's written on it. But it's octagonal, and it's at the street corner. What does it mean?
It's a stop sign.
It's a stop sign. What are you supposed to do?
Stop.
Right. Suppose you move to another country and you see a sign that's, I don't know, like this. On a stick. I don't know, some weird shape you've never seen before. What would constitute a transition from not knowing what it means to knowing what it means?
Where it's at, possibly.
Yeah, well, seeing what other people do when they encounter it. Maybe everyone comes up and go, ah! And they hit the gas. Maybe it's a sign for drive like hell. It's not a country that I would want to visit, come to think of it, but
Have you ever been on the Audubon?
no.
I have, it's interesting.
Yeah. So, right, knowing what something means knowing what to do, and then knowing how it's going to affect you. Right. Then there's artificial symbolic meaning, right? Right. So that the eight-sided thing. There's also natural meaning. If you're you're walking through the country and you see there's a house and there's black smoke billowing out of it furiously, just clouds and clouds of thick black smoke coming up and rising up there. What does that tell you about the house?
Maybe on fire.
Probably it's on fire, right? You come home and your back window is open, there's damage to the window frame, your back door is open, your clothes are strewn about the house, there's drawers are pulled out and have been emptied. What does that tell you? And valuable things are missing.
You've been robbed.
You've been robbed. That tells you something. It means something. So you know what to do next. You call the police or your friend Louis, because you know who bastard did it. Tool up, go after the gear. You have some response. There's some response. So we've got an idea what meaning is. Okay? And what's going on in here is you start with symbols, get other symbols by rules of symbols. Okay? This doesn't seem to be an attempt to produce meaning. This seems to be an attempt to do formal rules, manipulation of formal rules without producing meaning. Well, suppose this is made of wood, right? And in addition to sending out scrolls, there's this set of buttons here. Right. Connected to a motor. that's connected to wheels, undercarriage, something like that. Okay. Right. Now, suppose they put in a scroll here that says in Chinese, there's a meteor heading right for you, or a bomb, or something dangerous heading right for you. And going through this set of symbols and rules, which he has to do pretty quickly, comes out with a set of instructions that instead of saying, instead of writing symbols on a piece of paper, it says, press button B24. Or press button B, then 2, then 4. Something like that. Right? And it does that, and this thing, the engine starts up, it moves 20 feet to the left, and avoids the meteor. Right? Does that begin to sound like something that understands? Right, now, in competition to Searle's Chinese room, I would like to introduce the Chinese Roomba. Right. Suppose we make a Roomba with extra attachments and better wheels and things so that it can climb stairs, get over stoops, and so forth. And in it, and that this room, the Roomba is programmed in such a way that it can learn. And maybe learn the way a dog learns. And so the Roomba has a program like it explores the house and creates an internal map. And you follow it around, and when you're in the living room, you say, Roomba, this is the living room. In the bedroom, this is the main bedroom. This is the upstairs bathroom. This is the closet under the stairs. This is the door to the cellar, don't go there. Right. And then you say, Roomba, clean the downstairs bathroom, or it cleans the bits that it can. And it goes and does it. That's not really improbable. We can make machines that do that. Right. We can make machines that do very complicated things. And we can make machines that do very complicated things by verbal commands. Now, it's true we can make things that follow verbal commands that are clearly not conscious. But Chinese room was set up so it could not possibly have done semantics under any circumstances. Once we have a Chinese Roomba where you tell it something, Roomba, the house is on fire. Right? If it's got a data structure so that it knows that fire is associated with damage, that it can be damaged, it might have an instinct, a program for self-preservation. So Roomba, the house is on fire, the Roomba runs out of the house. Right? Screaming, fire, fire, fire. Maybe it has a cell phone and calls the fire department, in which case you're in trouble because you lied. Yes?
Is your Roomba just still recognizing the pattern of words? When they're put in this pattern, it could mean this, and put in that pattern, it could mean that,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera?
Well, what's happened is word patterns, which can be symbols,
Right.
right? Words are all symbols.
Right.
Right? It's learning what the words mean. Now, that doesn't mean that the Roomba is conscious, but it does mean that computers can do semantics.
It's not truly a fight or flight,
Right.
it's just recognizing the
Yeah.
pattern.
Well, you can make it as sophisticated as you like. We have machinery in our heads that recognizes what words mean, that recognizes
Correct.
what sentences mean. We have the Broca's area and Wernicke's area that take strings of sounds, convert them into representations of words, recognize them as words, and pass out the meaning, process it through the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and come back with... So the Chinese Roomba is not an analog of a full conscious mind. It is an analog of a little chunk of a full conscious mind. Right? The language processing. And language processing, by the way, is done unconsciously, almost exclusively unconsciously. You don't really have to think about what a word means under most circumstances. When you hear a new word, you have to think about it and try and work out what it means. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong, but it becomes unconsciously processed. So I don't think that the Chinese room proves that computers will never be able to do semantics. I think the Chinese room, first, it ignores the main argument for computer consciousness. It ignores the fact that we're talking about having machines do what neurons do. Right? This isn't what neurons do. Right? They don't do this formal rule stuff. We can make a computer that does what Roombas do. So I think that the Chinese room is a failed argument. It fails partly because it basically, well, there's a logical flaw of saying, hey, I can prove that the Wright brothers will never be able to fly. Look, here's my flying machine that doesn't work. That's not true. Second is the claim. His claim is computers can't do semantics. Well, computers can do semantics. They can recognize meaning in just exactly the same way that humans recognize meaning. They know what to do next. They take one symbol and relate it to other symbols, and they have they have symbols that are related to activities and events and conditions. So, all right.
Well, the other night I asked Siri what her favorite color was.
Oh dear.
And because I was doing this little experiment, and she actually had an answer that is green, but a different kind of green. So then we reworded the question so it was similar, and she still came up with the exact same worded answer.
Yeah.
I asked her if she liked green over blue, she had no answer at all.
All right.
Just let you know.
As a historical curiosity, there's this thing called the Turing test. Do you guys ever hear of a fellow called Alan Turing? He only invented the computer.
No.
He invented the computer. He was the guy who came up with the idea of a computing device that could perform any program. And that's actually very important because modern computers are Turing devices. They can enact any program, although some programs are too big for them to do all at once. You'd have to split the program into bits. In theory, this computer could do mental processing, neural processing. It's just a microsecond of human thought would take longer than this computer could exist for it to do. It would be it would be prohibitively slow by several orders of magnitude. But the Turing test is devising a machine that can follow any program, can do any information manipulation, any information processing, kind of digital processing. Well, his idea, he was once asked, Dr. Turing, do you think computers can ever be conscious? And he says, I don't know, but I can tell you how to figure out whether a computer is conscious or not. And this is called the Turing test. You have a person in an uncomfortable chair typing. Now, Turing said a teletype, which shows you how long ago this was. Typing on a keyboard, and there's a screen with the responses, right? And this is connected through a wall with something else. You don't know what's in there. Could be a computer, could be a human person. And the Turing test is, you have the person type questions and responses and try to chat with whatever's in there.
Right.
And Turing said, if we ever get to a point where a human being in here is completely unable to tell whether there's a computer or a human on the other end of the line, then and a computer is able, so that a computer is able to fool a human into thinking that the human is talking to another human. I mean, the computer doesn't know it's trying to fool a human, right? But, so, then the computer will be conscious. There's a lot of problems with that. Right? Consciousness is self-awareness. So let's say we have a computer in here. The fellow doesn't know that it's a computer. Okay, it's like a 1952 computer. Well, 1970s computer. Right, with the tapes and things. Right. Right. This fellow doesn't know it's a computer. Right. Now, let's say this fellow is genuinely convinced that he's talking to a human being and he's having a nice conversation. First thing is, it wouldn't prove the computer's conscious. It might prove that the computer has a mind, because consciousness might not be necessary to have a mind, but it can't prove that the computer is aware. Have you ever had a sleep conversation, or heard of sleep conversation? People are like, oh yeah, I talked to my husband, my brother, right? And he got up and we had this conversation, he said these things, and had no memory of it. Well, your verbal part of your brain can be working while the cortex is shut down, while you're not aware of it. You can say things without being aware that you are saying them. And we can say things without being aware that we're going to say it. Have you ever said something you go, oh my God, why did I say that? So a computer could do all this verbal stuff without being aware, without being conscious. So, but then we say, well, okay, we're talking about whether the computer has a mind or not, right? Talking with a person who has a mind, if they're not conscious, but they do all the responses, then they have the mind, right? You have a conversation. Problem is, there's computer programs, notably something called PC Therapist 2, that have fooled people. They've had a bunch of, they've done this Turing test where the computer hooked up to this program, PC Therapist 2, which is one of those programs that sort of asks you about what you're saying. Right? So do you think this or do you think that? That sounds interesting. Ooh, right? It's a sort of an early chatbot designed to be therapeutic. I think it's designed on the basis of a defective theory of therapy, but people were fooled. Not everybody, but some people were fooled. So the question is, for me, for the Turing test, to be effective, we have to at least have people on this side who are very sophisticated thinkers, who know how computers are different from people, who know what people are. For instance, if I'm ever taking the Turing test, I'm going to say, I'm going to write a story and I want you to give me a summary of it. Or I'm going to write a story and I want you to ask questions, and these questions will be based on logical inferences. Right? For instance, I might I could give a story, a guy, long story, and ask him to summarize it. Or I can give them something and say, okay, there's this field is in the shape of a fugi, and it has 4 straight sides joined by right angles, and 2 of the adjacent sides are the same length. What are the lengths of the other 2 sides? And how many corners does it have? Right? And these are things where people have to draw. So I would ask very tricky questions, questions that I think that a human would find. Look for questions I think a human would find easy, and when a computer would be impossible, unless the computer was as sophisticated as a human. So the Turing test is not necessarily a great test. If we have really, really sophisticated people here, maybe it's a valid test, and the person would only judge a conscious computer as conscious, or a computer with a mind as having a mind. But it occurs to me that it's possible that someone could write a program that would have very complicated responses. Actually, the summarizing the story thing, I don't know how to write a program that can do that. So maybe the summarizing the story thing is the way through this. So, but I can't be certain that you can't write an unconscious program to mimic a person that would fool even me, or a really sophisticated computer guy. So anyway, but that's the Turing test. It's a very interesting thing. All right, so we had Searle's objection. Now I'm going to talk about the qualia problem. I'm actually not going to say very much about it, because I think it's trivial. Now, qualia is based on the word quality, and so there are certain things, there's quantity and there's quality. Quantity, there's 2 pens, and over here there's 2 pens. Right? Between my 2 hands, the quantities are the same. 2 pens here, 2 pens here. But the qualities are different. Red pens here, blue pens here. So you see a difference in quality. When you're talking about lock, primary and secondary qualities, particularly secondary qualities. Secondary qualities are qualia. Qualia is just another name for all the secondary qualities. So you have this sort of what it feels like to see red. Right? So there's this experience, what it feels like to see red. There's this experience, what it feels like to see blue. And the argument is, well, computers can't do this. They can't make qualia. Computers can't have qualia. So computers can't have minds. Minds have qualia, right? Particularly consciousness. Actually, qualia are only a feature of consciousness, because they're, right? This experience feels different to this experience. And, you know, you could make a device that could measure the light coming off these objects. I mean, you can make a device that tells the difference between red and blue planes. That's easy. And humans can do this without consciousness. And you can know something without being aware that you know it. You guys know what a scotoma is? A scotoma is a gap in your vision. You can try to imagine that you had some annoying person walking around in front of you, holding his hand up in front of your eyes. Or rather, one hand in front of each eye, and when you move your eyes, the hands move too. Right? So you can only ever sort of see out of the edge of your eye. You have a blind spot. You know, like the phobia, the blind spot in the eye that we never notice because the brain fills it in.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Right. So, but imagine you've got a scotoma and there's this big gap in your eyes. Scotomas are caused by striate cortex lesions. A lesion in the striate cortex can cause damage to your visual field. So you have a bit of your visual field that's missing. So suppose you have a scotoma, and they've done this with people, right? And they have an wait, I can't draw a diamond. All right, so I have this card, it's a 7 of diamonds, in case, like, you know, okay, just assume this is a 7 of diamonds. And they do this experiment with people who have scotomas. They'll take a playing card, say the 7 of diamonds, and hold it up in the person's scotoma. And they say, what card is this? And they'll reply, don't be an asshole, I've got a scotoma, I can't see it. And you say, no, 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 take a guess. No, no, I can't see it. I don't know what card it is. Well, take a guess. Just take a wild guess. Pick a card at random, you know, take a guess. And say, okay, 7 of diamonds. Okay, that's the card. They knew what the card was. They didn't see the red diamonds. They didn't see the shapes. They knew it. Their brain was trained to recognize this. But the optic nerve goes to different parts in the brain. This is not surprising. But, right, they saw the card without experiencing the qualia. They did not have the sensation of seeing the red diamonds. They didn't see the red, they didn't see the shape, they didn't see any of that. They knew what it was, but they didn't have qualia. And the argument is, look, computers can do the other stuff, the stuff we're not conscious of, the knowing that it's red, recognizing the 7 of diamonds. It's very easy to train a neural network to recognize playing cards. It's a very simple task for a cognitive scientist. I couldn't do it. I'm not saying I could do it. But a cognitive scientist would find it fairly easy to do that. It's an engineering problem. How would a computer do qualia? Well, if someone asks me, how would a computer do qualia? I'd say, well, however brains do it. Because we come back to that basic fact that brains are made of neurons in a bath of varying levels of hormones. Neurons interacting with other neurons. Right. How is the striate cortex organized to produce a visual field? I got no freaking idea exactly how it does it. But I do know that it does it. And it does it by using neurons. Neuron activity makes qualia. To say, oh, a computer could never have qualia because a computer could never do what the striate cortex does. It's like saying, dude, a computer can do what the striate cortex does if we ever have computers powerful enough to model that, to make virtual neurons that will do what the real neurons do. We may never have the technical capability of doing it, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible. Computers computers will do qualia the same way human brains do qualia. We know that human brains can make qualia because I experience qualia and I have a human brain. I don't have a magic brain. Right? I don't have an immaterial object that does things by magic. I have a brain that does things by doing things. So, this is wrong. In principle, actually I'll put it in blue. In principle, computers would be able to make and experience qualia the way brains do. Now, I'm not saying I have a solution to the problem of qualia. I'm not saying I have a solution to what's called the hard problem of consciousness. But I know a solution exists because the brains do it. So whatever solution the brain does to make qualia, a machine might eventually be able to do. It's not ruled out. The fact that we don't know how brains do qualia doesn't mean that we can't ever figure that out, or we can't ever make something that does what brains do. We could actually maybe end up doing something that does what brains do without knowing how it does it. Mathematical proofs are getting so complicated that we can't test that we don't understand them, how they work. So we could eventually have devices we don't know how they work, but we've trained them or made them grow in such a way that that they do what we want them to do, even without us understanding it. Okay, that's kind of a weird thought. But whatever it is that human brains do to make qualia, well, anything that does that will make qualia. In order to break this, you've got to do more to break this argument. You've got to do more than just say, well, human brains do qualia, and I don't see how computers could do it, so they can't. Or even worse, the no argument, computers can't make qualia. You know, because they can't make qualia. I don't see how that works. That doesn't work. That's begging the question. All right, any questions? I'm begging. Any questions? You should. All right. Okay. If you're waiting on a response from me to go on to your next